Hi, everybody. My name is Vladimir Sitnikov, and we have Andres Sacco as well. Hi, Andres.
Hi, Vladimir. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. And can I ask you a question? Do you think people test software more or less than they did, say, 5 or 10 years previously?
I think most of the developers now create tests for everything and different kind of test.
Yeah, you know what? Like the more tests I have, the more painful it makes to support the test base, especially when, say, a new framework appears. And like, what if I have lots of tests for, say, Spring Boot application? What do I do when I change to a different framework?
Yeah, it's a good question, because when we change framework many times during the life cycle of a project, and when you do a change or a framework, you lost the entire test. You need to rewrite again all the tests, so you don't have the ability to check if my new version of the API or the microservices work the same as the previous one.
Well, that does not work. So you write books, you develop a lot, you test a lot, and you say that I should rewrite all my tests. That's not what the answer I want to have. Like, to have some.
Yeah, it's the most painful thing in the world. Rewrite the entire thing that someone do.
Okay.
So I think there is a way to solve this kind of problem, and I will tell you during this talk how you can create something that reduce the risk that when you change from one framework to another or one language to another, you reduce the problem at the lowest. So I invite you to watch my talk, which start now.
Yeah, let's proceed then.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this conference about karate using a martial art to do a test. And perhaps the title sounds a little strange for you, but during this presentation you will discover the meaning of this. Let me introduce me. My name is Andres Sacco. I work as developer since 2007 using different languages. Most of them are connected with the JVM. Also, I participate as technical reviewer on some of the biggest editorial around the world. And I publish some books, courses, and theoretical practical projects. Some of them appear at the bottom of the presentation. And lastly, I participate as a speaker on many conferences around Latin America and Europe. On the left of the presentation, you will see my contact information. So if you have any doubts, something that I don't cover during my presentation, and you have doubts, just send me a message by LinkedIn or an email, and I will try to help you as soon as possible. So let's start with the problem that we need to solve during this presentation. We need to find a way to create or have an integration test and end-to-end test with some restrictions or things that we need to consider. The first one is we need to find a way that use or create an end-to-end test which is agnostic to the framework that our application uses. As a developer, many cases or many times we develop an application that uses, for example, a Spring Boot test or Quarkus test. And if you want to migrate from one framework to another one, or you need to migrate to one version to another one, a major version, perhaps you need to rewrite all the tests, and you don't have a mechanism to detect if you introduce a problem or not, because you need to write again everything. So we need to find a way that, okay, I can rewrite my entire application, I can change the framework and nothing happened. I have something that gives me the information if I introduce mistakes or not. That could be for other purpose. It's not, I want to create an integration test. You can reuse this integration test to create a performance test or an end-to-end or a functional test or many other things that are not connected just specifically with end-to-end or an integration test. That have a simple syntax that anyone can understand, not just the developer, the QAs, the business analysts, the CTO, anyone that can write a sentence and more or less have some knowledge about technology, perhaps can understand the idea. And we need something that is simple to implement. But all these things are connected with BDD or behavior-driven development. And why I explain this? Because the idea is find something that covers most of the problems that I mentioned. It's because the frameworks or the tools that solve part of these problems using BDD. So to put all of you on the same page, I will explain a little about BDD. BDD is a behavior-oriented strategy. It puts the focus on the behavior of my method and not or the function or the classes. It's not just the idea of, okay, I need to test this method or something. It's like what this method will do. What is the idea of my test? You need to interact with different people because this kind of test or the strategy to do test implies that you can write in a simple way. So it's simple that I interact with other developers, a QA, a business analyst to understand what is the idea of the test and how I can create this test. It's a simple way to test and document at the same time because the test have in one structure or in one sentence the explanation about what is the idea of the test. It's not connected directly with any language because the idea is a way to do the test. It's a technique, so it's implemented on many languages, on many frameworks. And use some keywords like given, when, then. Perhaps if you use JUnit 5 and you download some library or you have a project, perhaps you find these words as a comment on a JUnit 5 test. This is not the idea. It's like perhaps this is a way to structure the test in the case of JUnit 5, but JUnit 5 is not oriented to BDD. But okay, and which libraries implement BDD? JBehave is one of them, is one of the most oldest. Cucumber, Karate, and Cucumber use behind the scenes and meta language knowledge as Gherkin. So the structure is more or less the same, but there are different features, there are different ways to run the test. Cotest, which is connected directly with Kotlin and Spock. Okay, you know now that there is a lot of libraries. So why use Karate? And now you know what is why the title is Karate. Because it's agnostic to the framework and the language. Again, it's not connected directly with any language. You can have an application that uses Quarkus, Spark Framework, Spring Boot, Struts, whatever that you want, you can use it because it's not connected that the thing that you use behind the scenes. Allow to create a black box test. And what is this black box test? When we create test or integration test using a Spring Boot test or including JUnit, we have the ability to mock certain piece of code or classes or something that interact with the method that we want to test. And this is okay because it's a JUnit or it's a unit test. The idea is that just test my function. The other classes or the other interfaces is not my problem. It's not my business. So The black box implies that you do a request to a certain endpoint and you only check the results. Everything that happened inside of your microservices, you can't change the behavior. You can only modify the external communication. For example, your microservices connect with other microservices or with a database. You can mock in some way the external communication because you want to test just your microservices. It's not your responsibility if another microservices fail or not or work fine. There are another tests that check if these other microservices work fine or not. And have a simple syntax that anyone can understand. Use the keywords that I mentioned before when given them. Which are the possible uses of Karate? Well, you can use this as an integration test. Just I want to check if this endpoint works fine or not. I send a request and I check the results. As a functional test, you can use it as a regression test. Imagine that you want to deploy a new feature and you are not sure about if all the platform will suffer some kind of problem. So you can write a regression test and running in a specific period of time or before to deploy on production, and if something happened, you abort the deploy of this new feature. And an end-to-end. Imagine that you want to check if a new feature works fine from the UI to the last microservices or the database. So you can use Karate with other modules because the way to structure Karate is like you have a core and different modules that is like a plugins. You can use it. So in this case, to create an end-to-end test, you can use Selenium and integrate with Karate and create an end-to-end test from the UI to the last microservices. Okay, how is the syntax? Because I show you a lot of benefits. The syntax is simple. It's like you need to declare a feature. A feature is like the name of a class. Imagine that is in a JUnit test. It's like which part of the application I want to test. In this case, I want to check the health of the Spring Boot of the actuator. You can define which are the background, the variables, or the things that you want to use it during the test. So it's like the before class or before and in the JUnit. So this part is loaded at the beginning of the execution of the test. And how you define the test? You need to declare as a scenario. This scenario is like a JUnit method. When you declare a test, it is the same concept. So you need to use the keyword scenario and put a name of on the test, and you need to declare which is the method or the URL that you want to use. In this case, I want to check if the health works fine or not, using the HTTP method get, because you need to declare which of the method that you want to use: post, get, delete, put, patch. And after that, I want to check something about the execution of this test is using then. I want to check the status. In this case, I want to check if it's 200 or not, and if the response match with this JSON. Is like the status is up. Nothing strange, and if you think anyone can understand the idea of the test, it's like obtain information about if the application is healthy or not, and do a request to this URL with this method, and I want to check if the result is this or not. Which other possible uses of Karate exist? You can use it to create a performance test reusing the scenarios. In the past, when you need to do a performance test using Gatling or Gmeter, you need to create another scenario that checks some specific behavior. So you need to know a lot of things about the platform or the endpoint that you want to test. With this approach, you can declare or create an integration test or an end-to-end test and use this file to execute many times as an performance test. We will see this in the example. I just explained because I want to have the idea on your mind. So the first step is you need to write the scenario using the features and the syntax that you will see on the previous slides. Define a simulation. The simulation is the scenario, how many requests I want to execute, how many seconds, and what is the things that you want to check. After that, you run the test, check the results, and in the case that it's necessary, you can do the modification. Of course, check the results and do the modification implies that something is manually, because the Karate don't do it for you. The first three steps are executed by Karate and Gatling, because behind the scenes Karate combines with Gatling to run this simulation, to create this scenario to check the performance of our application. So everything it's okay, but it's time to see the example. Here is the URL where you will find all the examples that I will show you during this presentation. So it's now this is the repository. I will show you because it's important that for you to understand what is the idea. You will have this directory which will contain all the tests that I will show you. You will find a Docker Compose file, and if you see inside the Docker Compose file have a database and a microservices. Because the idea of this presentation is use a real scenario with a real database, with real microservices to check if everything works fine or not. So let's go back. Here you have the requirements, how you can check the requirements, the documentation, the URL where is the application running, some FAQs, tools, and future readings. You have a lot of information here just to know. And if you run the microservices using Docker Compose app, you will have this kind of Swagger, which have a catalog about cities and countries. And it's simple like, okay, I want to check if I have the information about this city. And you see that there is, here, you have the information about the city, which is the country connected with this city and the continent. Imagine that you enter another code. This is the code doesn't exist. So this is more or less the idea of the API. You have here an endpoint that specify what is the idea of these error codes that appear here. Here is this one, and match with the city not exist on the catalog. So everything's okay. It's time to start with the presentation or with the live coding. Here is my repository. So I need to create a project that contains all my tests on Karate. To do this, Karate offered to us an archetype that creates all the things for us. I run this in interact mode. Will ask me a lot of things. Okay, I will show you this, and after that I will reload the project. So this is a POM file, a simple POM file which declares the version of Java, the compiler, the subfile, nothing strange, and declare here the version of karate here. And the only dependency or the other thing that is different from any microservices or any project that you want to create is this one. And why this use JUnit 5? Because as I mentioned, karate have a lot of modules, and to execute the test you need like the core of the library, which in this case is this one. There are another ones like Gatling and Selenium. What else? Because the other parts of the POM are nothing strange. If you open here, you will find different files. The logback file, nothing strange. It's a common logback file, nothing new. And the magic starts here. The karate config file have this section, which you will have this one. You have the possibility to declare all the configurations on your test. So, which is the environment, because you can have multiple environments. Imagine that you want to create an end-to-end test, and this end-to-end test you can execute it on production, on QA, on development. Imagine that you have multiple environments, and you in this section you can declare all the constants, all the things that you want to use or import in all the other in the test. And here is a if-else block which check which is the environment that are executing the test. So here you can customize which is the host and the port of this specific environment. Imagine that if you want to run in depth, you can include like localhost and the port. And in the case an end-to-end, I want to test in QA or in production. So you need to define all the things in this file. And you have this folder examples, which have 2 classes and one file that looks so strange because it's dot feature. So let's start with the example test. The example test declare a test is like a JUnit test that execute on parallel all the files, all the classes that are declared on examples here. So this test will iterate all the directories, all the classes that exist inside of examples to find which are the tests that I need to execute and check the results. Okay. After that, you have these user classes, and here start the magic, because you have this annotation, karate test, which say, okay, I want to iterate all the things that exist inside of the user directory and execute it. So this class don't do nothing. The example file is have the responsibility to run all these classes. And after that, you have a file here, a user feature, which contain the real test. So how you can run this? Let's do it. It's like a common Maven command. I execute one test, everything is okay, and as you can see, you have a lot of information about the latency, the number of scenario, and how many seconds takes to execute. At the last part, you have a report of karate, and if you open this file, you have this HTML which contain the information about the test. Sorry. And here you have the steps of each scenario, how many seconds takes each instruction to execute. Here, to execute the get method takes this quantity of milliseconds and check the results. And you have all the requests and the response. Okay, this is a fake scenario because you see that do a request to a placeholder. So let's do something. Let's start to drop all of this, and I will reload this because I have okay, it's more simple in this way. So I don't have nothing, I just have my karate configuration, and I want to declare some information. I will change all of the things. Remember that I mentioned that in this place I declare the configuration files, or the configuration variables, and the definition of the host that I want to use to test. Just to do the test more quickly, I copy and paste some piece of code. So this is the base path of the application, and which I declare on this config file, and I redeclare depending of the environment. In this case, both have the same URL, but imagine that you have, I don't know, you have in this one is like QA blah 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 .cam without the port. So this is a possible approach. Okay. What else? So the idea of this, after create or modify this, is okay, I want to create a directory which contain all my tests. In this case, I will create someone is catalog. And after that, as a recommendation, I suggest that you create or define different directories depending of the feature or the thing that you want to test. So let's create the catalog actuator, and inside of my actuator, another recommendation is create a directory which contain the payload that you will use to check the response or to send as a request on different directories. Why? Because in my previous example, when you see the piece of source code, you see that appears the entire response inside of the test. I will show you. Let's create another folder. So response. So I have the response here. No. Here, this thing I try to mention. So in this part is okay, is enough. It's not a lot. It's short, the answer. But imagine that you have something like this, okay? And imagine put this text inside of a test, and imagine that you have a JSON which have, I don't know, 2000 attributes or fields. It's not a good idea put inside. Again, are recommendations. And I will create again the health file feature. Now show me again. Okay. And I explain. This is our previous example that appears on the presentation, but I include some modifications. I declare which is the base URL, this ape URL, which match with this one. So when I execute the test, this say, okay, you need to use this URL and concatenate with this health path. And I declare a variable which use a function that exists on Karate, is predefining to read or write a file and load all the information that appear on the health, this file, and put in a variable. And why? Because you can use it to check the response. Okay, you execute this test on this URL with this method, and you will check if the status is 200 and match with this response. And this variable contains the JSON file. So it's a good alternative instead to have this one. You can do it, but as a just suggestion, try to use it in that way. Okay, I declare a test, but you miss something. You need to declare, let me see, you need to declare the class that executes all the tests. Okay, this more or less is the same to every Karate project. So I say, okay, execute all the tests that exist in this directory and just ignore the tests that have this tag. In JUnit, you can disable some tests, just annotate it, and you have the same ability here on Karate. Okay, this is the same that I show you. Let me show you something more. I declare the info and looks the same that the health, but the thing that that I want to show you is when you have a application, a Spring Boot application, you have something that is the same every time, like the health, but the info give you some information that change every time, the version. So if you create a test that have a specific version and you try to check if this version is the same, the first time everything looks fine. The next one, because you have increment the version, change and your test fail. And so you need to fix the test each time that you increment the version. This is not a good idea. So Karate give you some annotations or some keywords that give the possibility to check attributes or something that you want to check not in a simple way. For example, if you want to check if the version have some values, you can use this not null. And when Karate detects this keyword, say, okay, the version inside of the JSON have a value? Yes, no. Yes, okay, the test will execute fine. If not, will fail. And imagine that you want to check if the version is an alphanumeric version or numeric version, or I want to check if null or something like that. These kind of things exist on Karate, are predefined with the idea of solve this kind of problem. So everything looks fine, and after that I will clear, compile, and test. And while I execute all these commands together, because my idea is to remove all the previous execution, and you see that are executed both tests, info and health, and you have here all the information about the execution and about the results. Okay, everything looks fine. It's a simple test that checks the actuator, and I will show you the same but with a real endpoint. I will close this and city, sorry, city. Okay, I will create another test which check some things about the test. I will show you. I try to put the focus only on the things that are relevant for us. Okay, here are a test. I put a CT that return an error as a response, and here I put all the information about a CT. It's like this endpoint is the result of this endpoint where I introduce a bad code, I return have this code, and if I execute fine, I return or have this information. Okay, so more or less it's the same. The only thing that I changed that I can introduce modifications on the path. It's not like you only need to include this, you can include this and have the same. And it's not just 200, you can check all the things, other things. So let me do again this execution, and it's too quickly. And here are your information about the execution of the CT. And here are the code. This is a feature extremely useful because imagine that for some reason you have the answer is not the same. You declare a test that returns something and is not the same that you expected. You can check here on the execution of the method because you have the answer. So okay, it's not the same, and which is the difference? So you have here the JSON and compare with your test. So next step, because I mentioned that you have the possibility to execute a performance test using Karate. Here is more or less the syntax I covered with these examples, more or less all the things connected with the simple syntax. So let me start to introduce some modifications on the POM file. I declare these two properties because I will use it. And as a recommendation, try to, when you have on a same project the integration test and the performance test, try to split on different profiles so you have the ability to run the end-to-end or Karate test with one command, with one profile, and the performance with another one. I explain this because I will copy and paste. Let me show you. Okay, this is the variable that I declare. This is the common part that exists in every Maven project. And here I declare two different profiles. One with Karate, which have or contain the dependencies that I showed you previously, and the Surfire. Nothing strange. And after that, I declare another profile, which is Gatling. You can use another name. It's not necessary that you use this name. And I declare, again, these dependencies or this module of Karate, and I declare another one, which is Gatling. And after that, this is to run the performance test. And after that, you have this configuration of a plugin, because behind the scenes, Gatling uses Scala to run or execute, and you need to configure or this build to execute all the tests. And here are the Gatling definition to execute all the tests. So how you can run this is like verify +p Gatling, and I will execute, and an error need to appear. Okay. And why fail? You don't have simulation. What is a simulation? A simulation is a way to declare the scenario that you want to execute, reusing, let me show you, reusing the simulation reusing the scenario that you define on Karate. To be more quickly, this is sorry, I don't change the name, refactor rename. This will have problems if I not introduce the. So this is the class that I declare. All the classes, all the simulation need to extend, sorry, with about this simulation. And there are some things that you need to declare to reuse or run this test. First one is the URL that you want to check if something happened or not, but in this URL is like an example. After that, you need to declare the protocol where you declare the context of Karate, like the environment where you want to execute the integration test, and the base path that you want to check if everything works fine or not. Here is the environment, and here's start the magic. The first one is declare the scenario. Okay, I want to check all the information about one city, and I want to execute the test. And where is my test? My test is declared here on Karate feature, on this path, on this URL. And after that, of course, you need to declare which is the scenario, because not the Karate scenario, the scenario of our test, how many requests you need to send. So in this case, I will inject 10 users during 20 seconds using this protocol. So using this URL and using this feature. And in the assertion, you declare how many seconds will take each request. So more or less 55% of our request takes lower than 1 second. And this is all the variables you can redefine. But for now, everything it's okay. I will execute again the command to check if everything works fine or not. This will take some seconds because remember I declare 10 users during 20 seconds. And you will see a lot of logs because you are executing Gatling. Here, more or less, okay, everything works fine. So you have the information about how many requests, how many of them response in this percentile, and what is this response time is like this one. Less or equal to 1 second, 55% of our requests, 75, 95, 99. You can redefine all this information. It's not like a restriction where you need to put the emphasis on using the default values. And lastly, let me show you, because something more about the result of the execution, because everything looks fine, but it's not the most beautiful. Here you have the result of the execution in a better way. This type of report you can import on Jenkins. There are a plugin which take the results of the execution and show you all this information in a Jenkins. Here you have more or less the number of requests per second, the number of the percentiles, the response time in a distribution. You have a lot of information to check while something bad happened on your microservices or your endpoint. So in a simple way, just with what class you have the performance test. And if I declare this, I don't know nothing about the scenario that execute this feature. So if I do modification on this file, I don't need to change nothing inside or anything inside my performance test. So let's finish my presentation. Some best practices about the use of Karate. Try to use wildcard, like not null, to check random values or values that change every time, like dates or IDs. Not include JSON files inside of your source code, as I mentioned, or I show you. Try to put in an external file and reuse it. It's a maintain or keeps simple the integration test. Have different profiles to run the performance test and the integration test or the end-to-end. It's a good way to reduce the time of the execution. Define a structure. Try to have some kind of structure of name and the directories to organize your test. Try to reuse the scenarios. You have the possibility to import one test inside of another one. Imagine that you want or you need to have a lot of values in your database, and the values are insert in another scenario, or another scenario do something in particular. You can create a flow, import or reusing different scenarios on a same file, and create functions. As I mentioned or I show you, you see that there is a read function, so you can create another ones that covers something in particular. Here are some of the books that I recommend in the case that you want to learn more about PDD, and the blogs that have a lot of information. In particular, Ministry of Testing have a lot of information about testing and BDD, and Martin Fowler. I can say nothing about Martin Fowler. It's an incredible way or blog to obtain information. As a summary, Karate is a library to write different types of tests. It's agnostic to the framework or that you use in your application. It's possible to create a flow which interacts with multiple endpoints at the same time. You can reuse it to test, to create the performance test. And here is the source code where you will find everything about this presentation. So it's time to the questions. So if you have something to ask me, please write your question or ask me, and I will try to help you.
Thank you, Andres, for the great presentation. Yeah, and we have a couple of questions on the chat. And before we move to the discussion zone, I would suggest, well, you try to answer the question. Well, basically, what you just said is Karate is everything at once, yet it doesn't do everything, but it delegates. At the same time, it looks like Karate is suitable for API tests only. And that's the question by Leah. Is Karate for API only, or can it be used for other types of tests?
You can use it for many things. It's not connected just with an API. If you want to create an end-to-end that check a monolithic application, you can do it. If you have a distributed architecture, you can do it. You can create functional tests, end-to-end tests, different kind of tests, and not connected with the JSON. A REST API, you can do with SOAP UI or SOAP protocol, and you can do the same with both.
Okay, and can we do lower level tests? Like, is it suitable for unit tests?
It's not the approach. The approach is the lower test that you can do with this is an integration test or a component test. You can put the same example that I show you in my presentation. You can include in your API or microservices. You can put in the same directory and use the same command to run. In fact, I use it in that way as an integration.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that's a great summary. Thank you. Yeah, I would like to thank you again for the great presentation. That is really lovely. And I would invite everybody to move to the discussion zone so we can ask Andres for more details on the way Karate can be integrated into real tests and applications.